finish him. Haçienda, Doddington, Gooch and Salford gangs waged war in Greater Manchester's pubs and clubs. The city's drinking establishments have been the scenes of some horrendous acts of violence. Manchester has long been famed for its legendary nightlife scene, but while the city is home to an array of celebrated pubs and clubs, others have become renowned for all the wrong reasons. Over the years, Greater Manchester's drinking establishments have witnessed some horrendous acts of violence. During the 1990s, soaring gun crimes on Manchester earned the unwanted nickname Gunchester. As rival gangs waged war on each other, the violence frequently spilled out into the city's pubs and clubs. From the legendary nightclub that became a gangster's paradise to the boozer where the would-be assassins were killed with their own guns one Sunday lunchtime, these are some of the shocking incidents that have taken place in Greater Manchester's pubs and clubs. It was the pub shooting that sparked a revenge campaign of biblical proportions. As regulars at the Ship Inn in Salford watched Manchester United play Leeds on television, a gunman burst in and opened fire. Drinkers dropped their pints and dived for cover as Stephen Lydiot, the brother-in-law of Salford hardman Paul Massey, was peppered with bullets. But the gangland hit was not a success. Hit 8 times in the chest, stomach, left arm, elbow, and upper thigh, Lydiot survived. A bulletproof vest saved his life that day in April 1999, but he still suffered serious injuries. Determined to find the men responsible for his shooting, Lydiot discharged himself from hospital with a bullet still lodged in his groin. He then put together a team to carry out a series of sadistic attacks. Lydiot was later given a life sentence after being found guilty of conspiracy to murder and conspiracy to kidnap. 4 other members of the gang were sentenced to a total of 41 years for their part in the kidnappings. Lee Erdman was shot dead during a 3 a.m. lock-in at the Wellington Pub on Salford's Ordsall Estate in September 2011. The 37-year-old dad of 5 was murdered by a man who had spoken amicably with him for up to 30 minutes at the bar. During the conversation, the killer is believed to have secretly used his mobile phone to text an accomplice and told them to bring a handgun to the pub. Then as Lee walked towards the pub toilet at about 2:50 a.m., he was shot in the back. The .38 caliber bullet caused massive injuries, but as his victim lay dying, the gunman shot him again in the chest before stamping on his face. He spat on Lee's terribly injured body, then warned terrified drinkers to never speak to police about the incident. The pub's CCTV would have captured the murder, but the hard drive containing the images was stolen. No one has ever been convicted of Lee's murder, but police believe a trigger-happy member of an Ordsall-based crime gang, linked to 4 other shootings, was the killer. The former Pepper Hill Pub in Moss Side, home to an Islamic community center, Moss Side's Pepper Hill Pub was once one of the most notorious pubs in Manchester. It was used as a base by a gang of heavily armed drug dealers, who took their name, the Pepper Hill Mob, from the pub. With gang warfare rife in Moss Side during the 1980s and 90s, rivalry between the Gooch gang, named after Moss Side's Gooch Close, and the Pepper Hill Mob, saw a surge in violent assaults and drug-related murders. At the height of it all, the Pepper Hill Pub was shut down. However, the gang simply moved base and renamed themselves as the Doddington Gang. White Tony Johnson was just 22 when he was shot dead outside the Penny Black Pub in Cheetham Hill. He and an associate had arranged to meet a group of men on the pub's car park late on the night of Friday, February 22, 1991. Johnson arrived in his £25,000 white Ford Cosworth. He was asked by the other men if he and his associate had guns, and replied no. The other group then opened fire. A shot ripped the sleeve of the associate's jacket. He turned to run and was hit in the back. As he fled, the associate heard another 2 or 3 shots fired and saw Johnson fall. He then heard somebody say finish him and heard more shots. 2 of the 4 bullets that hit Johnson struck him in the back, and another in the neck. As he lay on the ground helpless, the final bullet was fired into his mouth. 5 men later went on trial for Johnson's murder, including Damien Noonan and Desmond Noonan, racketeers from a large Manchester Irish family. But a jury failed to reach verdicts in the summer of 1990 and a retrial was ordered, which saw Desmond Noonan tried again alongside other people. At the second trial, it was said that police believed Johnson's death stemmed from a £362,000 robbery he had been on with 2 others in November 1990. One of the gang had allegedly left his £80,000 share for safekeeping, but when he asked for it, Desmond Noonan allegedly told him there was only £40,000 left. The out-of-pocket robber said he would complain to Johnson. Prosecution lawyers alleged that Desmond Noonan visited another defendant and a plan was hatched to kill Johnson. In court, it was alleged that Desmond Noonan was the first to shoot Johnson. At the second trial, one defendant was cleared. and the jury failed to reach a verdict on Desmond Noonan and another defendant. Judge Rhys Davies entered not guilty verdicts on their behalf, as it was the second time the jury had failed to reach a decision and justice would not be served by a third trial. It was the legendary nightclub that was integral to Manchester's rise from the post-industrial doldrums. The Haçienda may have given the city a new, cool, international reputation, but it also became a magnet for gangsters looking to pump their reputations and bank balances. Greater Manchester's emergent gangsters were lured by the promise of lucrative drug sales.
The former Pepperell Pub in Moss Side, now home to an Islamic community centre, Moss Side's Pepperell Pub was once one of the most notorious pubs in Manchester. It was used as a base by a gang of heavily armed drug dealers who took their name, the Pepperell Mob, from the pub. With gang warfare rife in Moss Side during the 1980s and 90s, rivalry between the Gooch gang, named after Moss Side's Gooch Close, and the Pepperell Mob saw a surge in violent assaults and drug-related murders. At the height of it all, the Pepperell Pub was shut down. However, the gang simply moved base and renamed themselves as the Doddington Gang. In January 1991, shots were fired in the foyer. Days later, a young man was turned away at the door, came back with an Uzi, and flashed it at a doorman. Gangsters were holding the club to siege. The Cheetham Hill Gang's White Tony Johnson, armed robber and suspected killer, was at the heart of the trouble. Days after the machine gun was pulled on a bouncer, the club's late, great founder, Tony Wilson, held a press conference on the dance floor. "The Haçienda is closing its doors as of today," he said. "It is with the greatest reluctance that for the moment we are turning the lights out on what is, for us, a most important place. We are quite simply sick and tired of dealing with instances of personal violence." White Tony Johnson was considered so central to the trouble that the Haçienda's management only thought it safe to open in May 91, by which time he had been shot dead. On the club's reopening night, despite beefed-up security, including weapons archers and better CCTV, Salford and Cheetham Hill Gang members stormed the Haçienda. Then, a few weeks later, Salford gangsters turned up armed and 6 bouncers were stabbed. The club was determined to stay open, bringing in Dobermans to enhance security. Staying open would soon involve an unholy alliance with the underworld. The logic was that only gangsters could deal with gangsters, and so the notorious Noonan family took control of the door. The club's peace was uneasy and brief.
Gangster bullying and brawling soon continued, and bouncers linked to the Noonans were repeatedly accused of roughing up punters. The Haçienda would stay open for another few years, but the gangs had left an indelible mark on the scene. If it wasn't their violence killing the mood, it was police inspections. Clubbers began staying away, and debts mounted. One Haçienda bouncer, Terry Fairmont, was murdered in Clifton. By 1997, it was over. In June of that year, on a night when the licensing committee, 7 magistrates, accompanied by 2 senior police officers, turned up to inspect the club, 4 Salford gangsters who had been kicked out of the venue staged a revenge attack. Driving onto the pavement, one of the mob leaned out of the window and hit the bouncer, who had kicked them out, with a wheel brace. The club closed abruptly soon after, unable to pay its bills, its license in jeopardy. The nightclub where a gunman opened fire on innocent clubbers. Wayne McDonald shot 2 innocent men outside the Atlantis nightclub in Bolton in a murderous rage, sparked by his pals getting beaten in a fight minutes earlier. A witness to the shooting described how McDonald had a wild glare in his eyes in the seconds before blasting a volley of .22 bullets from a self-loading pistol at clubbers milling outside the venue. The 2 victims, Brian Kemp and Lee Howarth, escaped death but suffered serious injury in the November 2000 shooting. McDonald vanished in the aftermath of the shooting and spent 7 years lying low. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of 2 counts of attempted murder and firearms offenses over the nightclub shooting. At the time, he was already serving an indeterminate sentence for the public protection for shooting a police officer while on the run from detectives hunting him for the Bolton incident. It was a scene from the Wild West played out in a Salford boozer. On a busy Sunday lunchtime in March 2006, regulars at the Brass Handles in Pendleton were watching Manchester United on television when 2 gunmen stormed in and opened fire. But in a bizarre twist of fate, the target, who was shot 6 times, survived, while the failed assassins were disarmed and killed with their own guns. Fatally injured, the would-be hitmen staggered out of the pub onto a grass croft beside Fitzwarren Street, where they collapsed and died. In a trademark Salford gangland move, someone ripped the CCTV system from the pub. The murdered men Carlton Alvarenga, 20, and Richard Austin, 19, had been sent, almost forced, into one of the city's toughest pubs to assassinate a young upstart they didn't even know. It's believed they were in the debt of the Moss Side gang boss who organized the hit. That man was Ian MacLeod, a founder member of the notorious Dottington crew who, having sent the two young men to what turned out to be their own deaths, parked up close to the pub in his Ford Mondeo. As his hired guns lay mortally wounded, his mind was still on the intended targets. He was heard to ask, "Are they dead yet?" He walked onto the grass to check his charges were dead before calmly driving away. To this day, no one has ever been brought to justice for the killing itself. Bobby Spears, from Prestwich, was jailed for life for masterminding the bungled hit at the pub, which he is said to have paid MacLeod £10,000 for. MacLeod and convicted gun runner Constance Howarth were also jailed for their involvement. Less than 4 months before he murdered two unarmed police officers, Dale Cregan walked into a Tameside pub and shot dead an amateur boxer. Wearing a balaclava, Cregan arrived at the Cotton Tree in Droylsden, intending to kill his great rival David Short, 46, in May 2012. But his main target was in the toilet at the time. Cregan fired 7 shots, blasting Short's son Mark, 23, in the chest and shooting 3 other men at the scene. When David Short came back from the toilet, he found a scene of devastation. He sobbed as his son died in his arms. Just moments earlier, the Short family had been enjoying their night, playing pool and darts. Cregan later went on to murder David Short at his house in Clayton, and then gunned down PC's Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone after making a bogus 999 call from a house in Mottram in September 2012. He was jailed for life the following year after admitting the 4 murders.